Hello, all my movie-loving maniacs. It's your boy, Bradford Lassiter, aka Big Brad the Rock. Now, I know it's been a while since I've actually done a video where you actually see my face, but I'm back in with Ant-Man and the Wasp out in theaters right now. I thought I'd give my ranking of all 20 MCU movies, ranking from worst to best. Now, this is my personal ranking of each film and how I feel about them. If you have a problem with it, let me know in the comment section below and be civilized about it. Don't be an asshat about it. Just let me know how you feel about my rankings. In fact, go ahead and give your rankings of each Marvel Cinematic Universe film. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Now, coming in at last place, number 20 is Iron Man 2. Now, I don't necessarily hate this movie. In fact, I don't even think there's one bad movie within the MCU. I think they just range from great to mediocre at best. And Iron Man 2 is definitely the most mediocre of all the films. Now, I enjoyed this film for Tony Stark and how the arc reactor is making him sick and now he has to find a new element to cure him. All the Whiplash stuff was fun. I don't even mind how they introduced Black Widow. I just think that this movie has so many plots and so much stuff in it that it became disjointed and ultimately feels like a setup film for the Avengers. So therefore, not only do I think that this is the lesser of the Iron Man films, but this is definitely the lesser of the MCU films, period. Coming in at number 19 is Iron Man 3. Now, Iron Man 3 is definitely a better sequel than Iron Man 2. Only reason I have it so low is because as a Shane Black movie, it works. I just thought as an Iron Man film, it kind of lacked in some places. That being said, I still enjoyed this film for what it was. It was pretty much a Marvel Disney way of trying to tackle the Demons in the Body storyline. But they pretty much decided to deal with it by having Tony Stark having PTSD from the events of the first Avengers movie, which I thought worked, and him realizing that he is more than just an Iron Man suit. And yes, we have the plot twist with the Mandarin, which pissed off a lot of the diehard comic book fans, and I don't blame you. I'm just not as attached to the Iron Man lore, so therefore I just wrote with it. But it still doesn't change the fact that they could have had a very compelling villain, especially since they had Sir Ben Kingsley playing the role of the Mandarin. But I'll take what I can get, and I enjoyed this movie for what it was, but it still wasn't as great as the first film. Coming in at number 18 is Thor the Dark World. Now, I'll admit I loved this film when it first came out, and I still do to some degree, but upon subsequent rewatches since it came out, it definitely doesn't hold up. Like, Malekith, he's definitely the worst of all the MCU villains in this universe. Natalie Portman is wasted in this film. I will say that I like what they did with Thor and Loki in this movie. I felt they fleshed out Asgard as a kingdom more in this film than they did in the first film. The story was pretty mediocre. Only reason I put this over the Iron Man sequels is because I find myself enjoying this more and having a good time with the characters more than I do in any of the Iron Man characters. Coming in at number 17 is Doctor Strange. While I did enjoy this movie for what it was, to me, at least, it felt the most dull of them all. And maybe that's because I was really starting to feel the Marvel formula on this, which at that point was feeling a bit jarring and redundant. That being said, I like Doctor Strange's story arc in the film and how it opened up the mystic aspect of this universe. And I like the final act where he faces up against Dormammu, which that alone was worth the price of admission. And the visuals in this movies are cool to look at if you're under any type of altered mind state. If you know what I mean. Not that I condone that, but you know what I mean. At number 16 is The Incredible Hulk, probably the forgotten stepchild of these films. In my opinion, The Incredible Hulk is the best standalone Hulk film we will ever get. I think people sleep on this, Thor, and the first Captain America movie, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I really do love this film, and Ed Norton's portrayal of Bruce Banner, and at one point I thought it was better than Mark Ruffalo's portrayal as Bruce Banner. I just love the story of this man trying to find the cure for the Hulk, or at the very least trying to find a way to control the Hulk. But he keeps getting sidetracked by Thunderbolt Ross in the military, and the third act alone, to me, is worth the price of admission. At number 15 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, coming off the heels of Infinity War, that might be a blessing and a curse. Now, I say it might be a curse because this movie is coming directly after Infinity War, which left a lot of people depressed. Not because it was a bad film, but because of the outcome of that film. And so I feel this movie might be a blessing because this movie was a breath of fresh air and a little bit more fun coming off of the depressing and high stakes feel of Infinity War. And because of that, I can appreciate this film for using its special effects in its basic storyline, and the Wasp steals this show. I felt this was not a definitive villain, and the story was kind of dragged a little bit in some spots, but this movie was still fun nonetheless, and I can't wait to see what they do with Ant-Man and the Wasp in future films, particularly in Avengers 4. At number 14 is Ant-Man. I love this movie very much, and it's definitely a small-scale film in terms of story, tone, and even the characters. And some of the I thought some of the special effects in this film were a bit innovative. To me, this made for the perfect ingredients to make the best Ant-Man movie possible. Paul Rudd's humor worked in this film. Michael Douglas being added in this film brought some much-needed veteran star power, not just to this movie, but to this universe in general. Only reason I have this so low is because it's not one of the first movies I think of when it comes to the MCU. And that's okay, because tone-wise, it feels like the most detached from the other films, which makes it a true standalone film, and that's something I can appreciate. At number 13 is Spider-Man Homecoming. Now please, don't at me, bro. You gotta understand that the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies are so near and dear to my heart that I am unfairly biased against anything that came out after that. That being said, I will be the first to admit that this is the best Spider-Man movie since Spider-Man 2. Now, I was on board with Tom Holland's incarnation of Spider-Man when he was first introduced in Captain America Civil War, so I was excited for his solo outing, and I love how they took a different approach with Spider-Man by making it a throwback to the John Hughes coming-of-age type movies, which I thought worked, and I thought Michael Keaton worked as the Vulture, therefore kicking off this new run of good villains in the MCU. Only reason it didn't make my top 10 is not just because I'm unfairly biased against any Spider-Man movie that's not Tobey Maguire, but because I feel like with this incarnation of Spider-Man, they're trying to make him the new Iron Man, from his suit to the AI in his suit, and I just felt like Peter Parker as a character didn't quite land with me. What I love about the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, and Spider-Man in general, is that he's supposed to be the dollar store version of Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four. He's smart, but he's poor, and he uses all the resources he has available to him to make the best of what he's got. And he is not held accountable for his mistakes or choices. And I just feel like they didn't do that here. But regardless of that, I still felt that this made for a great Spider-Man movie that I can get behind, and I can't wait to see what they do with him in future movies. At number 12 is Captain America, the First Avenger. Before this movie, I was never a fan of Captain America, but after this movie, I still wasn't until his other films, which I'll get into in a minute. But as for this film, I loved his origin story of a guy who has good values and just wants to get out there and fight for his country, and is given the chance to do so and turns into the super soldier he was meant to be. And I just love the look and feel of this movie, of it being during the 1940s in the heat of World War II. Red Skull, in my opinion, is an underrated villain. I love Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter. This film had set pieces that had me in awe anytime I watch. But what really brings this movie home for me is when Captain America dies trying to save his country and gets frozen for 70 years and wakes up in modern day, which sets him up for his inclusion in the Avengers. But his journey of how he got to that point is what I loved. The only reason this movie is so low for me is because there were a couple of moments in the film I thought were a bit dull or dragged, particularly in the middle, when we see the montages, which brought the movie down just a tad for me. Plus, the two other Captain America movies, as well as other films, surpassed this film, in my opinion. But I will always have a spot in my heart for Captain America's first outing. Coming in at number 11 is Iron Man. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Why do I have the first Iron Man so low? Well, just let me explain. But first off, let me just say that I love this film as much as the next guy. Robert Downey Jr., especially at that time, coming off his little hiatus for personal reasons. He came back swinging, and he brought some charm and charisma to this character, which made me get on board with Iron Man as a character. And I love his story arc in the film, from a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist to a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist. But in the end, he does shy away from all that once he sees the weapons he built being used against the people he thought he was protecting, and didn't want his legacy to end up that way. So what does he do? He decides to make an Iron Man suit and try to right the wrongs that he made. And director Jon Favreau did an excellent job with setting up this world, being this is the first film to kick off this franchise. but he did it without setting up any other things. It was his own nice contained story, but at the same time it still left room for other things to happen. Now, the only reason I have it so low, in fact I have it just before my top 10, is simply because I'm not fully on board with Tony Stark as a character, because like Captain America told him in the first Avengers movie.
Big man in a suit of armor. Take that away, what are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Regardless of all that, I will always have a spot in my heart for the first Iron Man. Coming in at number 10 is Thor. Now, this is my favorite of the standalone films from Phase 1 because of Thor's arc in this film, from a spoiled prince to a humble god soon-to-be king that he was meant to be. And I just love the fish out of water story with him being on Earth, and that's what brought it home for me. From the look of Asgard to the themes of family and betrayal, with Loki feeling like he is the son who never got the love he wanted from his father, Odin. Kenneth Branagh, I felt, brought just enough of his Shakespearean background to this film. I thought this film works, and people often sleep on it. I like Captain America the First Avenger because it is an underdog story, and I love the first Thor movie because it's pretty much the story of this spoiled brat to a humble person. And to me, that makes for a good Thor movie. At number 9 is Avengers Age of Ultron. This movie, I think people unfairly hated on. And don't get me wrong, I definitely recognize the flaws this movie has. Like, it does feel disjointed in some parts. I think around this time was when Marvel was on a high of their successes prior to this film at the time, and they were starting to throw everything but the kitchen sink in this film, and I felt they were trying to set up other films. That being said, I still love this film. I felt Ultron was fine for what he was given. I like how they introduced some new characters like the Scarlet Witch and Vision. The action set pieces are bigger and somewhat better than in the first. They kind of overdid it with the quips, and the story between some of the characters are what saved it for me. At number 8 is Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, on paper, this movie couldn't have worked. Before then, it seemed like Marvel was reaching for the bottom of the barrel, but at the time, I felt they built up enough goodwill to sell us these characters, and it definitely worked, and that credit goes to James Gunn for his direction in this film. The world he built and the cast of this film played their parts, from Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, Zoe Saldana as Gamora the Assassin, Dave Bautista as Drax, Vin Diesel as Groot, and Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon. This was one of the most fun times I had at the theater, and I loved spending time with the characters, and I love every minute we get to spend time with the characters in other films. At number 7 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I know I'm probably going to get hate for this, but I don't care. I love Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Yes, it had some tone issues. Yes, some of the comedic moments overtook some of the serious moments, and I will even say Drax got on my nerves a little bit with his humor. But ultimately, I like this film for what it did with some of the characters. It furthers the characters from Star-Lord with his long-lost dad, Ego, but then losing his surrogate father with Yondu, which was still the show. Even the stuff between Gamora and Nebula I loved. I just loved how they further the story. Plus, I gotta ask myself, did I have fun watching this film? And the answer is yes. I even had more fun with this film than I did the first film, which is a bold thing to say, but that's just how I feel. And just like Age of Ultron, I think Guardians 2 is a movie that kind of got unfairly hated on. At number 6 is Thor Ragnarok. Now, coming off the weakest of the Thor films, Thor the Dark World, Taika Waititi gave some much needed energy that the Thor films needed. From its story, the tone, the score, the characters, its color scheme, even to Thor's hair. I absolutely love this film. And I love what they did with Thor, Loki, some of its new characters, Valkyrie, and how they inserted the Hulk in this film, which is probably the best film featuring the Hulk. This film was just pure fun, and in my opinion, the best Thor film, because they finally realized what the Thor movies needed to be, a throwback to like the Flash Gordon type movies. Sure, they undercut some of the serious moments with humor, but I am willing to overlook it because in the end, I had a great time with this film. Coming in at number 5 is Captain America the Winter Soldier. Now, just like Taika Waititi, the Russo brothers gave Captain America some fresh energy that Captain America needed. Like, when this movie came out, people were telling me that this movie is better than the first film, and I watched and I was like, oh shit, okay, wow, by better, you mean fucking better. What I loved about this film is that they made it a political espionage spy film, which worked for the character of Captain America in every way. The action in this film is some of the best action scenes I've seen in not just comic book films, but in movies in general in modern memory. I absolutely loved the plot twist in this movie, which definitely turned this universe on its head. This is one of the best sequels I have seen in recent years. At number 4 is The Avengers, the first Avengers movie. One of the best movies in the past decade, with lightning in a bottle. Joss Whedon carefully crafted this movie where these different characters from different franchises have different conflicting personalities, that by the end we got one of the most entertaining movies in which a 5-year plan at the time came out together so perfectly. Just watching these characters interact for the first time was so much fun, and the action was insane. Arguably one of the best comic book films of all time. At number 3 is Avengers Infinity War. Now, after years of build-up, we finally get Infinity War, arguably one of the most anticipated movies of all time. Get to watch not just old characters, but new characters interact with each other. That alone was worth the price of admission. But the real driving force of this movie is Thanos. And that right there pushes this movie to the top 3 for me. While I don't condone what he is doing, but at the same time I understand where he's coming from, which makes for the most terrifying but emotionally compelling villain. To me, this is the Empire Strikes Back of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, due to its outcome, which I am still shaken up about, and I have not stopped thinking about this film since the 3 times I've seen it in the theater. Hell, one time I was at the movie, I theater hopped into Infinity War and I caught the very ending of it. Now the only reason I have it at number 3 is because this is essentially a part 1 movie, and I felt that until I see the 4th Avengers film in context with this movie, I'll probably love it even more. Well, I already do love Infinity War now, it's just I'll love it even more once I see it in context with Avengers 4. At number 2, the runner-up is Black Panther. I fucking love this movie. From Ryan Coogler's direction, to the cast of characters in this film, to its tone and look, to its complex story, I have this at number 2 because I can obviously relate to it, go figure, and it also can be a social commentary, starting with its villain played by Michael B. Jordan, and then Chadwick Boseman's King T'Challa. Black Panther is tested on his values and morals, on what it means to be a king, that by the end his values and beliefs are changed by the end. And did I mention Killmonger, which up until Thanos was arguably one of the best Marvel villains, because he's one of those villains, again, he's like Thanos, to which I don't condone his actions, but at the same time I understand where he's coming from. This movie spoke to me on so many levels. I saw this movie 3 times in the theater. I can't stop gushing over this movie. This movie came out at the right time, and it's not just one of the best comic book films, let alone it's not just one of the best Marvel or Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, but it's one of the most culturally important films of all time. And finally, rounding up this top 20, at number 1 I have Captain America Civil War. I love this movie because to me this movie is everything Age of Ultron should have been. In fact, at one point I thought this was the Empire Strikes Back of the Marvel Cinematic Universe until Infinity War came out. But what I love about this film is how the Russos juggled and handled characters so perfectly, and properly laying down the seeds for them to direct Infinity War by laying down the foundation of how they handle and juggle this many characters they handled in Infinity War. While this movie does feel like Avengers 2.5, it's still very much a sequel to The Winter Soldier, and it continues the story between Cap and Bucky, while at the same time bringing in the story of the Sokovia Accords, and how that tears the team apart and the conflict between them. But I love how they introduced Black Panther, which his story arc in this film, I personally like more in this film than I liked in his own movie. I love how they introduced Spider-Man. AntMan stole the show when he became Giant Man, and the whole airport scene was every comic book fan's dream. Just watching Spider-Man interact with these characters made me shed a tear of joy. And that last fight between Captain America, Iron Man, and Bucky, because of that plot twist, which in my opinion is probably one of the best plot twists I've seen in years. To me, the reason I put Captain America Civil War at number 1 and why it's my favorite is because to me because I feel like it all started with Captain America the Winter Soldier, of how they blended two genres together, with it being a political thriller and a comic book film, and it culminated into Captain America Civil War. Because like, while it is a superhero film, it's a film that has something to say. You don't know whose side you want to be on, but you understand both sides, and it just makes you question, and how it just did a lot for certain characters, and how it laid down the groundwork for Marvel Phase 3 leading up into Infinity War and ultimately Avengers 4. And that is why I have Captain America Civil War at number 1.
And that is my ranking of every single Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. Please let me know what you think of my ranking of these films. Let me know in the comment section below and give me your ranking of these films. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like what you see, go and check out my channel. The link is in the description below. And be sure to check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Peace.